Hi there, and good afternoon. My name is Craig Gabriel, and I'm an Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Oregon. I'd like to begin everyone some top-line numbers from recent overnight protests and property damage and violence near the Mark O. Hatfield United States Courthouse here in Portland. On Thursday evening, a couple nights ago, 7 people were charged for federal crimes, including assaulting federal officers and failing to obey lawful orders. And then last night, federal officers arrested one person on suspicion of failing to comply with a lawful order. However, this person was later released without being charged. So no charges for last night. Since early July, 60 people have been arrested on or near the courthouse property. We here at the U.S. Attorney's Office have pending criminal prosecutions against 46 of those defendants, comprising 30 misdemeanors, 8 felonies, and 8 violation citations. To date, we have seen crimes ranging from assaults on federal officers, arson, willfully damaging or creating hazards on government property, disorderly conduct, and failing to comply with lawful orders. The conduct most concerning to us has been the nightly assaults on our federal officers. Each night, these officers, unfortunately, have been subjected to threats, high-powered laser strikes to their eyes, and a barrage of projectiles, including bricks, metal ball bearings, commercial-grade fireworks, mortars, canned goods, frozen water bottles, and other hard objects. These officers have sustained serious eye and hearing injuries, significant burns, puncture wounds, and a broken bone. Just last night, 6 federal officers were injured here in Portland. One sustained a concussion, and another was hospitalized with burns and other wounds from a mortar blast. Those of us in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the District of Oregon are aware that we are in the midst of an historic civil unrest due to generations of racial injustice. The tragic murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, economic hardship and catastrophe, and a global pandemic. People are angry. Very large crowds are gathering, marching, shouting, and expressing deep and legitimate anger and frustration with police and the justice system. People all across the city of Portland are protesting in constitutionally protected ways, and they've done so for the last 57 days and nights. We wholeheartedly support the community's constitutionally protected right to assemble together in large and even rowdy protests, speak their minds as they see fit, and engage in peaceful and civil disobedience. That said, we have to condemn the ongoing violence against police officers and justice facilities, which we've seen most recently with the targeting of federal officers and the Hatfield Federal Courthouse. Because of the recent focus of violence and property destruction toward our courthouse, out-of-state federal law enforcement officers have been brought in to support local federal officers whose mission it is to protect the Hatfield Courthouse. And actually, local federal officers have been protecting this courthouse for years, since it was built in 1997. The federal courthouse is a building we all share, all of us. It's a building that serves each one of us in our community. It's where every month dozens of immigrants come to take an oath to be sworn in to become American citizens. It's where people who believe that their constitutional rights have been violated come to seek justice. In fact, as we all know, the protesters themselves have sought justice in this courthouse with their lawsuits to protect members of the media and legal observers, and to prevent the Portland Police Bureau from using tear gas against peaceful protesters. The federal district judges who heard those lawsuits and sometimes ruled in favor of the protesters work here in this very building. Our office is committed to de-escalating tensions and fostering a productive conversation about needed changes in law enforcement. And that's something no one is denying. It's not a controversial statement to say that we need change in law enforcement. Now, finally, as everyone knows, the courthouse is now surrounded by a fence to reduce the risk of physical conflict between law enforcement and violent agitators. These past 3 nights, officers have been subjected to the risk of serious injury just to keep the fence standing, as members in the crowd have used power tools and other vehicles, ropes, and attempts to try to tear down that fence. Federal officers do not want to go outside of the courthouse, let alone outside the fence line. So here's the deal. If the protesters don't seek to damage or destroy the fence, then the officers have no need to go outside the fence or leave federal property. And I'll say that again. If the protesters don't seek to damage or destroy the fence, then the officers have no need to go outside the fence or leave federal property. After we hear from the Department of Homeland Security, I look forward to taking your questions. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Hey everybody, this is Harry Fones, Assistant Press Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. I have a brief statement to read, and then I'm going to go ahead and give a full readout of all of the events last night as recorded by us. So the violent situation in Portland for the past 56 days continues, with violent anarchists rioting on the streets as federal law enforcement works diligently and honorably to enforce federal laws by defending federal property and the lives of their fellow officers. As Craig mentioned, this week we put up a stronger fence around the building perimeter. This secure fencing has kept a lot of the criminal violence away from the courthouse, so we aren't seeing as much damage on it. But it has now become the main target of the rioters who have attempted to tear it down and breach it using ropes, saws, and last night we saw power tools. Last night we also saw rioters attempt to set the fence on fire. Federal officers are, again, only leaving the building to respond to attacks on the fence. And night after night, they're being met with rioters with hard projectiles, mortar-style fireworks, and lasers that can cause permanent blindness. So for a full rollout of what happened last night is demonstrators started to gather around 8 p.m. local time, and they reached to be about 1,000 people. By 10 p.m., the crowd was estimated to be somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people. At 10:15 local time, a rioter was arrested for trespassing after climbing over the fence protecting the Hatfield courthouse perimeter. Around 10:45 p.m. local time, rioters began to aggressively rock the fence back and forth in an attempt to topple it. At 10:58 p.m., the first mortar-style firework of the evening was fired at the courthouse. Rioters continued to attack the fence, forcing federal officers to issue multiple warnings to cease. Rioters responded to these warnings by throwing a flare into the fence's perimeter. Rioters then started to use saws to take down the fence, while others disabled several security cameras at the courthouse by shooting them with paintball guns. At 11:18 local time, federal officers were forced to leave the courthouse building for the first time in response to the rioters' attack on the property. As they did, they were once again attacked with lasers, as has been the case in all previous nights. Around this time, rioters began to attack the fence with power tools, and also around this time, there were reports indicating that groups of rioters were starting fires in the vicinity of the courthouse. At 11:32 local time, rioters began to drive a car towards the fence as large mortar fireworks were fired at the building. In response, federal officers were forced to leave the building to repel the rioters. While the officers stood at the fence, rioters again attempted to set it on fire. At 11:49 p.m., for the first time that night, Molotov cocktails were seen being thrown at the courthouse. Minutes later, rioters continued their efforts to saw through the fence and also attacked the courthouse's loading dock with power tools. At 12:15 a.m. local time, federal officers began to sustain multiple injuries, one of which required medical attention after an officer took a direct hit from a commercial-grade firework. At 12:33 a.m., another federal officer was hit with mortar firework. Around this time, officers were also assaulted with objects filled with unknown liquids that were being hurled over the fence. At 12:45 a.m. local time, the crowd was still at approximately 2,000 people. At 12:50, federal officers declared an unlawful assembly and warned the crowd to cease the violence and to disperse. Rioters responded with more lasers attacked, renewed efforts to set the fence on fire, and throwing more projectiles at officers. Minutes later, an officer was struck with a frozen water bottle. At 1:31 local time, rioters attached a rope to the fence and attempted to pull it down. They tried this the night before since it was erected. At 2:15 local time, rioters lit fires around the courthouse and continued to feed them with wood and accelerants. Shortly thereafter, after 3 hours of sustained assault by violent anarchists, federal officers were forced to go outside of the perimeter for the first time to repel the crowd. During this effort, a federal officer was struck in the head with a mortar firework. At 12:40 a.m. local time, Portland police declared an unlawful assembly. At 2:58 local time, reports indicated that rioters had set traps to puncture tires and vehicles at all the egresses of the Edith Green Federal Building. We reported last night at least 6 injuries to federal officers, and we saw no reports of serious injuries to rioters or protesters. Overall, again, as DOJ said, we conducted one arrest during the night's violence, and that is our readout.
And we will now begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, you may press star. If you are using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset before pressing the keys. To withdraw your question, please press star then 2. And at this time, there will be a brief pause until the first question. And our first question today will come from Maxine Bernstein with the Oregonian newspaper. Please go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned that your office is committed to de-escalating tension. How are officers de-escalating tension?
So, Max, this is Craig.
Thanks.
Good question. How are officers de-escalating tension? Officers are here to protect the courthouse and the people in it. The fence is the primary way right now that officers are seeking to de-escalate tension. As I mentioned, the officers would love nothing more than to stay inside the courthouse all night long. Before the fence was up, we had some violent agitators come up to the courthouse steps, come up to the front door, rip off the plywood, and shatter the glass door. We put plywood back over the door. Then they ripped off the plywood and shattered the door to a first floor office. And then they shattered a window to a first floor office, attempting to gain entry into the courthouse itself. So to create some distance between the protesters, and the vast majority of the protesters are there peacefully. We've all seen the Wall of Moms and the NAACP protests next door. That is what we support, and that is what we want to see amplified and grow. Now, the fence was put up just to create some space. The fence was put up so that the peaceful protesters could focus on Black Lives Matter and racial justice. When the agitators, I'll call them, seek to break through the fence with those saws and power tools, then they're seeking to come into the building and create the kind of destruction and danger that they did before the fence was up. So through the fence and through the restraint that they've shown to allow the fence to be rocked back and forth, to allow protesters to come right up to the fence, despite the fact that a couple nights ago they broke through the gates, so we removed the gates, and then we reinforced the fence, and then they cut the bottom of the fence. That is really the cause of the conflict right now. It's the very few, and I want to emphasize that, it's the very few of the crowd who come not intent on doing anything with their voice, but intent on destruction and intent on confrontation, unfortunately, with federal police. So that's probably the best way that I can answer your question right now, Max. But I have spent time in the building, and I've seen the restraint of those federal officers. Thank you.
And our next question will come from Conrad Wilson with Oregon Public Broadcasting. Please go ahead.
Hi. Something like 3,000 people from across the city showed up last night to protest, and they knew that they were likely going to be tear gassed and shot with impact munitions to protest racism in the criminal justice system, and because they don't approve of the federal law enforcement tactics. I guess, is there any plan to address either of those grievances?
So, what are the grievances, Conrad?
People are protesting racism in the criminal justice system, and they're upset with some of the tactics of federal law enforcement officers. I guess, is there a plan to hear them out or kind of address those concerns?
Yeah. Okay. So the racism in the criminal justice system, I can't speak for the entire federal government. And, I mentioned that we are committed to the need for change. And maybe 6 weeks ago, we were talking about a national conversation of reimagining the police or defunding the police or reforming the police, because we know people of color are subject to force by law enforcement at a higher rate than white people are. They're arrested at a higher rate than white people are, and they're sentenced to longer prison terms than white people. So we need to have that conversation. We have been engaged in that conversation, and we'll continue to do so. Now, on the tactics, I can't vouch for the federal law enforcement. That is primarily a DHS question. In the instances where there have been allegations, well reported in the media, including by OPB, that there has been excessive or unnecessary force used with the less than lethal round that hit a protester in the face, with the alleged unlawful arrests by DHS, and then the striking of the Navy veteran with the baton. The Office of Inspector General for the Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security is investigating those specific instances. And that's probably where I should leave it on tactics. But yeah, there will be accountability to the extent that the tactics did not comply with department policy or federal law or the Constitution.
Harry, do you have anything you could add along those lines?
No.
And our next question will come from Jennifer Dowling with Coin 6. Please go ahead.
This question is in reference to the terminology that you're using. From my understanding, an unlawful assembly was declared by federal law enforcement and by Portland Police, but I was not under the impression a riot was declared. So why use the term riot? Was a riot declared, or is that a term you're just choosing to use to describe people?
Hi, Jennifer. Did I use the term riot, or was that DHS? I don't think I used that term.
Well, why was DHS using it? Is Mr. Fones still on? It was used almost exclusively by Mr. Fones.
I can't speak to the language that DHS is using. I intentionally did not use that term, so I can't field that question. Sorry.
Oh, is Mr. Fones off the line? I'm sorry.
I don't believe he's taking questions.
I see. Okay, I have a follow-up question, which sorry, let me take that speaker.
Sure.
It doesn't have to do with the follow-up question. Doesn't have to do with that.
Okay.
As for the use of tear gas, why was it so intense? We felt it blocks away. I was with a group of peaceful protesters where nothing was going on, and they were gassed out. There was like a lot of moms there, and just a lot of peaceful protesters on the steps of the Justice Center. But not just there. Residents at the Essex House blocks away, and also at Coin Tower where we work were gassed. Employees at Coin Tower were getting headaches, and their eyes were stinging, and they are blocks away from the federal courthouse building. So why use so much tear gas?
Jennifer, I'm sorry, but I really am not in a position to answer that question. As a prosecutor, I'm not in control of tactics, and I'm not really in the best position to describe why the tear gas was used and why it was deemed necessary by federal law enforcement officers. The U.S. Attorney's Office, in general, is not in control of tactics. So that's really a DHS or a U.S. Marshal question.
Again, they're not on the line to answer that, right? They just made a statement and they are just listening now? They're not answering? Is that?
I believe that's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And our next question will come from Kate Conger with New York Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for taking the question. I just wanted to clarify the numbers that you gave earlier on arrests and prosecutions.
Okay.
It could be the total number of people who have been detained by federal law enforcement, or is there some greater number who have been detained but not under arrest?
So my understanding is, and if it's different, we'll follow up and confirm with you, is that 60 is the total number of people who have been detained or arrested. And, there's a legal distinction between detention and arrest, but we're not splitting hairs. So anybody who has been detained and moved to the courthouse or fully arrested is included in that 60 number. And then with their charges, as I said, pending against 46 of them for the 30 misdemeanors, 8 felonies, and 8 violations. So then there were 14 people, if my math is right, who were arrested and then released without being charged.
Got it. Thank you. And another question, if I may. What does the future of this protest and the federal response look like? I'm wondering if you can give any insight into how long federal agents or additional federal agents beyond the marshals who are already there will be stationed at the courthouse, and just what you expect to see in the next few weeks.
So the easy way for me to answer that question is to say, really, it's a DHS question and a U.S. Marshal's question, not a U.S. Attorney's Office question. That's really as far as I should go. But let me just say, really, it'll be dictated by the peacefulness of the protests. If DHS and the U.S. Marshal Service deem that the courthouse can stand and can have integrity and is not subject to damage or attack, then the officers will go home. I think it's pretty. I think, not to be flip about it, but I think it's that simple.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And our next question will come from R.J. Marks with Teesside Signal. Please go ahead.
Can I get that name again? I'm sorry.
R.J. Marks, Teesside Signal.
Okay, R.J. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, since you're having this conference as a joint conference, this is a follow-up on the last question. Why is the DHS representative not available for questions?
As an employee of the Department of Justice, RJ, I can't answer that question on behalf of DHS. I apologize.
what does that say to the level of communication between the organizations that are here to enforce this law and to bring justice to this building when the two agencies cannot be together in one call?
I don't have anything further to add, RJ, on that.
Yeah, I just listened to the press conference earlier, and I guess I'm wondering, it seems like each night is similar, where there's expected tear gas at the end and impact munitions, and what are the efforts to try to resolve this?
So, Matt, go ahead, Russ. Sorry.
No, you go ahead, Bill.
Well, efforts to resolve this, you mean have this come to an end, Max? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I think many of us, but I'll stick with me, I've been saying this for weeks now, and I've reiterated this numerous times in the last 2 weeks. Ending this is a community-led effort, and it's not a law enforcement effort. I feel strongly, and we have been in the process of speaking with as wide array of interested parties as possible, to include community leaders, faith leaders, business leaders, who and any elected officials willing to join in the conversation. And we've had some good conversations thus far about working together to build a consensus for how best to bring this to an end. So those efforts are ongoing, and very good dialogue going on, and we'll continue in those, because it is my belief the best answer to your question is it ends when the community demands that it ends, and by that I mean the violence. We're not talking about ending peaceful protest and people exercising their First Amendment rights, and the demands for systematic addressing of racial injustice within the criminal justice system, within the economic system. Those voices are being heard and have been heard since the murder of Mr. Floyd. And so those must continue. The only issue that, from my perspective, we're asking that it ends is the nightly violence and destruction of not just federal property, but there's been lots of city-owned and county-owned property and private business property damaged, and the violence directed towards state and local officers, and of heightened intensity in the last 3 weeks, federal officers. So that's the part that needs to end. That courthouse needs to be open and accessible by members of the public who are seeking answers, redress to their civil claims, as was pointed out a moment ago in the events you were on and asking questions. This is where protesters file lawsuits and have judges hear their allegations and make rulings on those. Naturalization ceremonies were occurring there monthly. They should be occurring. The criminal cases need to proceed. It's already been challenging for all those parties in those kinds of cases because of COVID. And everyone's been doing their best to respond to those, to keep the criminal justice system going and the civil justice system going. So it's already challenging, but we need to have those doors and windows replaced and people coming down and feeling safe coming downtown Portland so that they can pursue their jobs, their interest, access inside the courthouse.
And
so when that ends depends on when people stop the violence.
One other thing, I think there's questions about the rules of engagement for the federal officers, and clearly over the last week, the attention has been focused on many in the crowd wanting the federal officers to leave, feeling that their presence is escalating the conflict. Where does the federal authority end? Because there's been night after night federal officers who are going out into the street several blocks from the courthouse, firing tear gas and impact munitions, and there's reports, and I don't know if they're credible or not, but hopefully the marshal can speak to it, but there's reports that and photographs of some federal agents or officers in camouflage, like aiming handguns with potentially live ammunition at people. I don't know if that's happening.
Yeah. So, Maxine, this is Russ Berger.
Thank you.
Our deputy U.S. marshals are, we've told them to remain in a completely defensive posture in the federal courthouse. And that's what our responsibility is, the interior of the courthouse and protecting the court family and keeping, violent people from trying to break in or set arson fires. And, one of the things that we've done to try to de-escalate what's going on is we put up a pretty solid fence that seems to have created a set-off that helps keep people, from the front of the courthouse attempting to break in and do additional damage to it every night. We have to defend that structure so that people don't get into the courthouse and try to destroy it. So the only time our people are responding outside is when, for example, last night somebody took a industrial grinder to that fence structure to try to breach it. They went out to repel that breach attempt, and in doing so, as soon as they leave the courthouse, they come under assault with rocks and bottles and canned food and ball bearings and marbles from slingshots, industrial fireworks and lasers. And when that happens, when they're under attack, that's when they have to respond with less than lethal munitions, with gas, with impact munitions, to try to get the people that are assaulting them to stop. And if that does not happen, if they don't stop, that's when they pursue them outside of the area. But as soon as the threat has subsided, they retreat back into the courthouse.
But there, Marshal, there have been, large crowds of people that are not who are behind the people who might be trying to mess with the fence, and they're getting caught up in, tear gas, and journalists have been, hit with impact munitions. So how do you avoid the peaceful protesters who are present from also getting targeted by officers' use of force?
Yeah, we want to support people's right, to express themselves, their First Amendment rights. But at the same time, when our people are under attack, they have to defend themselves. I think it would be great if the peaceful protesters would tell the violent ones to please stop so that they don't get, they aren't the recipient of gas or munitions because of the actions taken by the violent protester. And like Bill said, it has to be a community response to bring this to an end. That courthouse represents democracy in America. I mean, it protects people's civil rights and human rights. And when people are attacking that courthouse, they're attacking those, tenets of society. And it's just got to stop. And I agree with Phil. We need to have the community needs to say, okay, it's enough of this. We need to move on.
So do you believe at all that the federal officers have gone beyond their mission in terms of defending the courthouse by, pushing people back 4 blocks off the property of the courthouse? I mean, do you feel that's within your boundary with it legally?
I think that they need to use the minimal amount of force necessary to stop attacks on them. And if that means pushing them back across the street, then so be it. If it means pushing them 4 blocks away, if that's what it takes, then that's what they're going to do. But, our people, they don't want to use force. We'd love to not have to use any at all. We want to remain inside the courthouse structure and, protect the integrity of the courthouse, and address assaults ongoing on officers when necessary. But they really don't want to have to go out and pursue people outside.
And has there been, in this ongoing dialogue, has there been any communication with the mayor or the governor as this continues?
So, I don't really want to get into the details of the dialogue specific to hoping to move forward. I have not had communications with the governor. I've had communications with the mayor's office, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And I know, the Portland police have dealt with the issue of a fence that they thought would curtail the damage, but then the fence became the flashpoint, which it apparently is becoming here at the courthouse. And ultimately, the county removed the fence. Is that even being considered at all as a potential step?
So the fencing that the police department was using is similar to what we were using initially. It's chain link fence that really isn't reinforced, and you're correct that the violent protesters have focused on those fences and brought them down and used them actually as weapons against the facilities in the block streets and try to set up encampments, and so their decision to remove that fencing was based on the fact that similar to us, it was being used against us. The fencing that's in place now at the federal courthouse is embassy-style fencing that's got very heavy jersey barriers anchoring it down, and it's all welded together. And the purpose of it, as I said, is to try to de-escalate, to keep the violent people back from the courthouse so that our people don't have to respond.
And can you? I had asked regarding. Are any marshals or other federal officers pointing lethal weapons at anyone in the crowd?
U.S. Marshals are not.
Do you know if any other officers are?
I can't speak to the what the DHS elements are doing.
Okay. And then, are there any contract officers with the federal contingent?
Contract, no. The only contract officers we have are court security officers that work during the daytime at the federal courthouse.
Okay.
And those are typically retired police officers.
Okay.
Or institutions of the government, right? So, again, this is why it needs to be a fully based community across the spectrum of participants willing to call this out for what it is, demanding that it stop, and demanding these violent extremists do something else, leave, don't come and hijack the message that has been going on peacefully for weeks now. So that's the answer. And until that happens, we're going to do what we need to do to protect federal property for the reasons we've articulated.
And obviously, you're aware the mayor has and the city council has restricted any coordination or cooperation between federal officers and local police. Can you comment on that, or what impact that has on your operations?
Well, from my standpoint, it's nonsensical. It's just political theater. It's unfortunate because everything law enforcement accomplishes to address on multiple fronts is done through partnerships. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, child abuse, money laundering. I mean, you name it. Almost every agency has individuals assigned to various task forces from federal, state, local, and tribal, right? Mm-hmm. That's the way law enforcement works. It works well together, communicating. It's more efficient. It's from a taxpayer standpoint, it's a great use of quality resources. We help each other out, right, to help to solve these different kinds of crimes. To say that to pass the resolution that you're barred from talking with law enforcement partners it's just political, and that's just so unfortunate, short-sighted. It doesn't help anything, but it is what it is.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is Portland Police has been a great partner to us for years and years, and we're looking forward to getting back to business as usual with them as well. Okay.
Can you comment at all? I mean, there's been, the Donovan, I know these are under investigation, but they've been stark images of, the U.S. Navy vet who's standing there as a marshal's striking him repeatedly with a baton, just standing there. And, hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And the image of, obviously, Donovan getting hit with his hands holding a stereo above his head. And then the allegations, as shown in court, it was only one substantiated, but another video of someone being, taken off the street by these officers in camouflage that just say police in front and have their insignia, I guess, on their patch, which is smaller. Do you want to say anything about those actions, whether you feel that they're appropriate or not?
So, Max, I'll answer that question. These are matters under investigation, as Russ addressed a moment ago. When matters are under investigation, we don't comment on them. These are investigations underway. All allegations of misconduct are taken very seriously. There's always with any agency, this is true at any level of law enforcement, state, federal, local, tribal, or what have you. There are procedures at play for review of allegations of misconduct. Those are underway. No one wants to see anybody hurt. But until the investigations are concluded, which means those investigations need to be thorough and fair, we won't comment on them.
Okay. And then just
So,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. The second part of your question about people being picked up off the street, the Marshal Service does not have any undercover people working out in the crowds.
Okay.
We don't do any of that.
Okay. All right. Let me just see. I wondered if there was any communication before the enhanced federal officer presence began with local or state officials. Sorry. Hello?
So say that again, Max.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure. I wondered if there was any initial communication with state or local officials before the additional federal officers arrived here in Portland, the enhanced presence. And if you could say, I mean, a lot of the critics are saying this is just an effort by President Trump to boost his standing in November's election.
Look, we're not going to answer politically based questions. I mean, there's internal communications that go on that we're not going to discuss. But I mean, the basis of that question is politically based, and we're not going to go down that road.
Okay, can you say whether, I mean, was there discussion with state or local officials at the time before the federal officers arrived in Portland? Just
there have been federal officers helping with protect the Hatfield from the beginning. So the politicalization, the spin on this of assistance is just not helpful. But in terms of internal communications, I don't think it's appropriate to speak to that.
I just wondered if there was communications like with the mayor, the governor, when the FPS mentioned that they were going to ask for additional federal officers because they were, I read in court papers, they needed the additional officers. I just wondered if that might have helped the community, realize that, who these guys are on the street in the unmarked vans and camouflage uniforms.
I think that's probably a better question for the DHS components.
Okay. So I know you've said that, until there's an end to the violence and the agitators messing or trying to destroy or get through the fence, the federal officers are going to remain there. That's what I'm hearing.
So they have a statutory obligation
to
protect the federal judicial process, and so they're going to continue to do that. And hopefully, going forward, this will come to an end, and they don't have to continue doing that.
Okay. And just wanted
Max, just
Hold on. I realize in the interest of time, gentlemen, I know this was slated for 30 minutes. I guess you got time for about 2 more questions.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Billy, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, we're not. Anyone who thinks we're like just going to give up the court, the Hatfield, the Pioneer, or any other federal facility downtown, that's not going to happen. So we'll continue to work together to defend the property and the process that Russ and I have both tried to highlight. That process has to go on, so we're not leaving.
Okay. And then there's been some attorneys who are calling for grand jury reviews, either federal or state grand juries, to look into specific actions of some of the federal officers over the past week or two. What do you say to that?
Well, we have investigations underway. That's my answer to that.
Okay. And I don't know if, Billy, if you've been working out of the office, are you able to, or working remotely? I don't know if you can share that, but I know there's others.
With the exception of today, I work out of the office every day, as do a certain core of individuals. Because of COVID, we continue to have use of telecommuting for the majority of our people. But I'm in there every day unless I have to go out of town for something.
Okay. And then the distinction between, I think there was 60 people arrested, and then there's 46 pending criminal prosecution. So the difference, the 14, so was that, those other 14, was there not enough probable cause or to bring charges on those remaining?
Right. So like any other case that we review, if it doesn't meet all the legal elements of the statute that it's being reviewed under, then charges aren't proceeded with.
Okay.
Okay, Max, it sounds like that's probably the last question you'll get in. Either that, and I'm not worried about the bridge is probably going to break too, as far as I only had it slated for a certain amount of time. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. Anyone want to add anything or?
Yeah, I do. I'm glad to hear you're going to be embedded in the courthouse tonight to kind of get a firsthand look of what our people are faced with. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, gentlemen, for taking time out of your schedule, and also Max for doing this as well. And I think Kevin's going to take good care of you this evening, and if you need anything from us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much, all.
Okay, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Max.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.